At 07:42, a technician pries open a corroded gun bay. Salt crystals crack under his gloves. The metal hinge resists, then gives with a shriek that echoes across Hangar 79 at Naval Air Weapons Station, China Lake. Dust swirls through morning light. Inside the Panther's left wing root, behind the 20mm ammunition drum, something wrapped in oilcloth sits where only munitions should be. The technician freezes. The aircraft arrived 3 weeks earlier from a sealed naval storage yard in Arizona, cataloged as a routine preservation candidate. Grumman FF Panther, Bureau number 125,184, last flown November 1952. Restoration crews had already stripped 600 pounds of degraded wiring and hydraulic lines, but this compartment was never listed in technical schematics, and the bundle is stamped in Cyrillic. When ordnance historians and counterintelligence archivists arrive from Washington on February 18, 2023, they find more. A microfilm canister wedged beneath the feed chute, a folded grid map of the Sea of Japan marked with 7 red circles, and a maintenance log page dated November 18, 1952, the day Lieutenant Royce Williams fought 7 MiG-15s alone. Williams was a 27-year-old U.S. Navy pilot who survived the longest jet dogfight of the Korean War. Officially, he damaged several enemy aircraft and returned with catastrophic damage. But the oilcloth packet contained something else: Soviet annotations evaluating Panther maneuver envelopes against MiG-15 climb profiles, and a penciled Russian phrase beside a ballistic diagram. SL isha ka omm yedel yen yeruikrat. Too slow. Why would Soviet engineering assessments be hidden inside an American fighter's gun bay? Why were they sealed next to ammunition drums that overheated during combat? And why did no post-mission inspection ever record their existence? If you want to see how this story unfolds, hit the like button. Because what investigators begin to suspect next will challenge 70 years of accepted history. Royce Williams was not supposed to become a legend. He was born in 1925 in Wilmot, South Dakota, a farming town where winters dropped to -20 degrees Fahrenheit and machinery often determined survival. He learned engines before algebra. By age 16, he could rebuild a tractor carburetor blindfolded. He joined the Navy in 1943, trained as an aviator in Texas heat exceeding 100 degrees, and flew late-war Pacific patrols that saw little combat. By 1952, he was 27, married, quiet, and technically proficient rather than charismatic. Squadron mates described him as methodical. He wrote flight notes in tight block lettering, recording fuel burn rates to the gallon. However, his evaluations consistently mentioned one trait: stubborn persistence under pressure. He rarely aborted exercises even after hydraulic faults or icing. That persistence would matter in 35 minutes over freezing water. The Korean War had entered its grinding phase. By November 1952, front lines stabilized near the 38th. Parallel, air combat intensified instead. Soviet-supplied MiG-15s operated from bases in Manchuria, flown by North Korean, Chinese, and covert Soviet pilots. Their swept wings allowed speeds above 660 miles per hour and climb rates exceeding 9,000 feet per minute. American straight-wing Panthers struggled above 35,000 feet. However, naval carriers still needed fighter cover during coastal strikes along North Korea's eastern shore. Task Force 77 launched Panthers despite their disadvantages. Intelligence reports warned of MiG patrols sweeping across the Sea of Japan in groups of 4 to 8. Engagement doctrine advised avoidance, but carrier schedules rarely allowed avoidance windows longer than 20 minutes. Early signs of contradiction emerged weeks before Williams's mission. On October 6, 1952, radar operators tracked MiG formations descending unusually low, below 10,000 feet, altitudes where Panthers maneuvered better. However, Soviet doctrine favored high-altitude interception. Analysts suspected inexperienced pilots, but cockpit gun camera film showed disciplined formation spacing of 300 yards. That was not novice flying. Another anomaly surfaced in maintenance reports from USS Oriskany. 2 Panthers returned with 20mm ammunition expenditure exceeding training norms. Nearly 70% of onboard load fired in single engagements. However, pilots reported fleeting contacts. Why fire so much against targets rarely confirmed? Ordnance officers logged the discrepancy but found no explanation. Hints of concealed directives appear in declassified naval communications decades later. A fragment dated November 10, 1952, orders carrier air groups to maintain continuous presence within 50 nautical miles of Vladivostok approaches. The phrasing is unusual. Official mission statements emphasized interdiction of Korean logistics, not Soviet ports, but the instruction persists across 3 successive daily orders. What they didn't know was, the morning of November 18, 1952 began with a routine strike package. USS Oriskany sailed 120 nautical miles east of Wonsan. Sea temperature measured 46 degrees F. Winds reached 28 knots from the northwest. Williams launched at 12:05 local time in Panther 125,184 with 760 rounds of 20 ammunition and fuel for 1 hour 35 minutes. Official destination: barrier patrol at 26,000 feet along the Korean coast. But radar vectors changed 18 minutes after launch. Controllers redirected him northeast, 40 miles offshore. The new coordinates lay closer to Soviet territorial approaches than standard patrol zones. Williams acknowledged without question. However, later analysis shows the vector intersected a corridor used by MiGs departing Vladivostok at 32,000 feet. The intercept geometry suggests anticipation rather than chance. At 12:41, Williams climbed through 30,000 feet. Outside air temperature dropped to minus 35 degrees C. Frost formed along canopy edges, crackling under vibration. He sighted contrails above 7. Distinct streams diverging like spokes. Seconds later, sunlight flashed off swept wings. MiG-15s descending in line abreast formation. He was alone. He pushed throttle forward. The Panthers' Pratt & Whitney J-42 engine roared, compressing air at 7,250 RPM. Speed reached 520 mph. MiGs passed overhead at perhaps 650 mph, then curved back downward. The engagement began 70 miles from Oriskany and 85 miles from Soviet coastline. First pass, a MiG overshot low. Williams rolled left, pulling 4.5 G. The Panther shuddered, wings vibrating. He fired a 2-second burst, 120 rounds. Tracers arced orange against blue sky. Impact flashes appeared along a MiG's fuselage, but the enemy climbed away. However, the next 10 minutes escalated rapidly. MiGs attacked in pairs, diving from 35,000 feet. Williams countered by turning inside their arc below 25,000 feet where his straight wings held tighter radius. Fuel gauge dropped to 70%. Ammunition to 540 rounds. Contrails shredded into white mist. The cockpit smelled of cordite and hydraulic fluid. At 12:58, a cannon shell struck his wing root. The aircraft lurched. Warning lights flickered. Hydraulic pressure fell to 1,200 psi. However, controls still responded. He stayed engaged. Another burst fired 90 rounds. One MiG streamed smoke. It spiraled downward, disappearing through cloud at 18,000 feet. But 6 remained. The fight stretched to 20 minutes. MiGs cycled attacks every 90 seconds. Williams descended gradually to 15,000 feet, forcing them lower into denser air. Engine temperature climbed toward 650 degrees C. The canopy interior iced at edges, frosting his peripheral vision. He wiped it with a gloved hand. Fuel reached 45%. Ammunition, 310 rounds. At 13:07, 2 MiGs approached head-on. Closure speed exceeded 1,200 mph. Williams fired a 1-second burst at 1,000 yards, 60 rounds. Tracers intersected the lead aircraft's intake. Flames erupted. It disintegrated into fragments that flashed past his canopy. Shockwaves rattled the Panther. However, debris struck his fuselage, puncturing fuel lines. Fuel pressure dropped instantly. Now crisis deepened. The gauge fell from 40 to 25% in under 3 minutes. He turned southeast toward the carrier, but MiGs pursued. One attacked from below at 13:11. Williams rolled inverted, diving 5,000 feet. G-forces peaked at 5.2. The Panther trembled near structural limits. He fired again, 80 rounds. Another MiG trailed smoke and vanished downward. But 4 still circled. At 13:15, ammunition reached 120 rounds. Fuel, 15%. Hydraulic pressure oscillated between 900 and 1,100 psi. However, the MiG's energy advantage shrank at 10,000 feet. Williams used tight scissors maneuvers, forcing overshoots. He fired final controlled bursts, 30 rounds each, damaging 2 more aircraft. Both broke off trailing debris. Silence followed. No MiGs remained in sight. Williams descended to 5,000 feet, fuel at 8%. The sea below looked black and metallic. Engine sputtered at 13:21. He radioed emergency bearing. Carrier group lay 58 miles away. Range margin, perhaps 5 minutes. However, leaking fuel sprayed across fuselage, creating vapor smell in cockpit. At 13:24, he saw Oriskany's wake. Deck crews watched as he approached at 140 knots. Hydraulic failure worsened, flaps barely deployed. He landed hard at 13:27. The Panther skidded 600 feet before arresting wire caught. When engines shut down, 263 shell holes riddled the aircraft. Ammunition remaining, 2 rounds. Immediate outcome, survival. But the post-flight inspection would reveal damage inconsistent with official narratives. Debriefing began within 30 minutes. Intelligence officers recorded Williams's account. Engagement with 7 MiGs, heavy damage inflicted, several probable kills. However, gun camera film from his aircraft malfunctioned, frames overexposed by sunlight reflections. Investigators questioned him repeatedly on headings, altitudes, ammunition expenditure. They noted discrepancies between radar logs and his timeline. However, more unusual was what they did not ask. They never questioned why he had been vectored so close to Soviet airspace, nor why carrier radar had anticipated MiG presence 20 minutes early. Debrief transcripts show entire sections redacted, pages 4 through 6 missing in archived copies. The Navy publicly reported a routine defensive encounter. Williams received a Silver Star citation in 1953 mentioning engagement with multiple enemy fighters, but the citation omitted numbers. Internally, intelligence analysts assessed 4 confirmed MiG losses, yet Soviet records remained silent. Diplomatic tensions with Moscow were high. Acknowledging Soviet pilot deaths risked escalation. Williams returned to duty. He flew 110 more combat sorties through 1953. After the war, he became a test pilot, later a civilian engineer. He married, raised children, coached youth baseball. However, he never spoke publicly about the 7 MiG fight. Even squadron mates recalled only brief references. Investigators inside Naval intelligence remained uneasy. Maintenance photographs of Panther 125,184 showed ballistic patterns inconsistent with random dogfight damage. Several penetrations clustered around the gun bay. However, internal panels removed during repair were never archived. Parts were scrapped. Documentation gaps widened. Years slipped into decades. By 1968, Williams retired from the Navy. The Korean War receded in public memory. Soviet archives stayed closed. Analysts who had studied the engagement moved to other assignments. However, a few kept private files noting anomalies, unexplained vectoring orders, missing gun camera reels, altered maintenance logs dated November 19, 1952. By 1992, after Soviet collapse, historians sought corroboration. Russian sources confirmed multiple MiG losses on November 18 near Vladivostok approaches. However, pilot identities and mission purpose remained classified. Williams, now in his late 60s, declined interviews. He said only, "I did my job." Time passed further. He died in 2017 at age 92. Personal papers revealed nothing unusual. No diaries about the dogfight. No correspondence with intelligence agencies. However, the Panther itself had been preserved in storage since 1954, sealed and rarely inspected. The secret died with him, or so they thought. Modern excavation begins with preservation, not suspicion. In January 2023, Naval Air Systems Command initiates restoration of Panther 125,184 for museum display marking the Korean War's 70th anniversary. The team includes structural engineers, ordnance historians, and materials scientists. They use fiber optic scopes to inspect inaccessible cavities, ultrasonic thickness gauges to map corrosion, and 3D laser scanners capturing 0.2 millimeter detail. But early scans detect density anomalies within the left gun bay. The cavity behind ammunition drum A measures 4.8 inches deeper than design schematics. Engineers suspect post-combat deformation. However, borescope imagery shows a rectangular void with sharp edges, a manufactured compartment. Layer 1 discovery emerges on February 14. Technicians remove the drum assembly and find an oilcloth bundle weighing 1.2 kilograms. Inside are Soviet technical diagrams dated 1953. They depict Panther wing loading curves against MiG-15 turn radii. Marginal notes in Russian evaluate the Panther as inferior above 30,000 feet. Least shocking, perhaps, wartime intelligence often captured enemy data. However, these diagrams post-date the 1952 dogfight. Why store them inside the aircraft, and who placed them there? Layer 2 appears beneath the diagrams. A cylindrical microfilm canister labeled in Cyrillic. Ote che yote 718, report 718. Film frames show aerial plots of 7 aircraft vectors converging near Vladivostok corridor. Coordinates match Williams's engagement zone precisely. However, the document header lists Soviet Pacific Fleet Air Defense Directorate. This suggests Soviet reconstruction of the battle and after-action analysis. But again, why hidden inside an American Panther? And why in English-marked ammunition compartments? Layer 3 surfaces days later. Under the microfilm lies a folded navigation grid printed on U.S. Navy issue paper. 7 red circles mark MiG starting positions. A blue arrow indicates Panther intercept path. Handwritten annotation in English. Intentional penetration corridor. The phrase implies planned incursion towards Soviet airspace. However, the ink dates via chemical analysis to late 1952. The annotation was contemporary, not later speculation. Someone within U.S. command structure had mapped the engagement as deliberate provocation. But container number 4 held something that changed everything. Within a sealed metal sleeve lodged deeper in the cavity, technicians extract a thin notebook, pages oil-sealed. The cover bears U.S. Navy format, but inside the text alternates English and Russian. It is a translation log, Soviet assessments paired with American commentary. Entries dated November 2023, 1952. The most striking page analyzes MiG losses. It lists 4 confirmed destroyed, 3 heavily damaged. Beside each entry appears a U.S. notation. Engagement achieved objective. Another line, Panther performance underestimated by adversary. The notebook reads like joint analysis, not enemy versus enemy, but shared technical evaluation. Expert analysis now intensifies. Linguists confirm Soviet handwriting matches known Pacific Fleet analysts. Ink spectrometry shows American and Soviet entries made within hours of each other. Paper fibers trace to Vladivostok military stock. However, binding thread matches U.S. Navy supply. The notebook itself is hybrid, physically combined from both nations' materials. Layer 5 emerges under ultraviolet scanning of the notebook cover. Faint embossing reveals classification stamp. Joint Technical Exchange, November 1952. This phrase does not appear in any declassified U.S. or Soviet program records. No known cooperative aviation analysis existed during active Korean War combat. Final container 6 rests deepest in the gun bay wall, a slim titanium capsule 6 inches long. Inside lies a single document, a memorandum signed by U.S. Pacific Fleet Command and Soviet Pacific Air Defense representatives. Dated November 25, 1952. It outlines a covert agreement, controlled aerial engagements to test aircraft performance against each other without escalating conflict publicly. The Williams dogfight was not accidental. It was a live-fire evaluation mission. The memorandum reframes the entire encounter. It explains why Williams was vectored unusually close to Soviet approaches and why MiGs descended to Panther-favorable altitudes. Both sides sought empirical performance data under combat conditions. Losses were expected but politically unacknowledged. The objective: determine whether straight-wing naval jets retained viability against swept-wing interceptors. This explains Soviet advisors' later dismissal of the Panther. Their 1953 diagrams assumed high-altitude combat, where MiG-15s dominated. However, the November 1952 evaluation revealed Panthers could inflict severe losses in lower-altitude maneuvering engagements. Soviet analysts acknowledged this internally. The Russian annotations inside the gun bay confirm it. Yet official doctrine preserved the narrative of Panther obsolescence to maintain strategic confidence. For U.S. Navy aviation, the findings justified continued carrier fighter deployment despite Air Force skepticism. The Panther's success against 7 MiGs, 4 destroyed, 3 damaged, validated naval emphasis on maneuverability below 30,000 feet. However, the cooperative origin of the test remained secret to avoid political backlash during Cold War escalation. This explains why debrief records were redacted and gun camera film suppressed, acknowledging coordination with Soviet forces. During active conflict would have been explosive. Both governments concealed the arrangement. The Panther's hidden compartment served as a physical dead drop, preserving joint analyses inaccessible to routine maintenance. Investigators who had long suspected anomalies are vindicated. Their concerns about vectoring orders and missing documentation align with the memorandum's existence. They were not misinterpreting data. They lacked the classified framework connecting it. The wider implication suggests other controlled engagements may have occurred. Soviet archives mention evaluation contacts in 1951 and 1953 without detail. U.S. naval communications contain similarly ambiguous phrasing. The Williams mission may have been one of several clandestine live-fire tests shaping jet doctrine on both sides. Some records remain classified or lost, leaving an unresolved network of covert aerial experiments. Among Williams's preserved belongings, archivists discover a single personal item. Linked to the mission, a photograph taken on Oriskany's deck days after November 18, 1952. Williams stands beside Panther 125,184, bandaged hand resting on the wing root, exactly where the hidden compartment lay. On the back he wrote, "Still flies." No further explanation. A second object appears in family archives, a letter dated December 1952 to his wife. It mentions only fatigue and gratitude for survival. One line stands out, "Some things I can't ever explain." The phrasing mirrors secrecy oaths common in intelligence operations. However, he never elaborated. His final years were quiet. He lived in California, attended reunions, and spoke sparingly about Korea. In 2002, he received delayed recognition, confirming multiple MiG kills. Observers noted he accepted honors modestly, emphasizing squadron teamwork rather than personal heroism. Family reactions to the 2023 discovery are subdued. A grandson states publicly, "He always said he was lucky." They express surprise at the joint memorandum, but no sense of betrayal. For them, the revelation confirms what they sensed, that he carried responsibilities beyond ordinary combat. They request the Panther remain displayed intact, compartment preserved as found. History teaches us that adversaries sometimes cooperate in shadows. The Williams engagement was both battle and expury. Meant conflict and collaboration entwined. It reveals how Cold War rivals quietly tested each other's machines and doctrines, risking pilots' lives for data shaping global strategy. At 07:42, the technician's pry bar broke salt-stiff hinges, exposing hidden truth beside silent cannons. The same wing root once absorbed MiG shells now yields documents reshaping history. Metal remembers what nations conceal. Today, Panther 125,184 rests in controlled display, its gun bay open, capsule and notebook preserved under glass. Visitors see only a damaged fighter. Few grasp the secret chamber that redefines a famous dogfight. Comment which mystery we should investigate next.